They rolled through my rows like it was a country lane, tires singing over seedling stems, and when I walked out to the fence the next morning, all I could see was a muddied stripe where my corn should have been. I said nothing at first. I stood there with coffee cooling in my hand and counted the crushed plants like bills, and that's when the anger started feeling less like heat and more like obligation. This is what I do for a living, I kept telling myself, and I don't begrudge people a shortcut, but I won't let them treat my land like a convenience store parking lot either. My name's Jesse Calhoun, and I don't fancy myself a hero, just a man who's had the same patch of ground behind his house for 20 years, who knows the smell rain makes in red clay, who knows the sound of tractors coming down at dusk. I live on the edge of a place called Greenwoodvale, a ribbon of houses and good intentions stitched onto the map by an HOA called Willow Lane. Most folks around here are decent. They wave, they borrow a cup of sugar, they bring casseroles when someone's sick. But there's always someone who thinks rules are for other people, and for us that someone was Lila Thornton. Lila wore new sunglasses like a shield, had a taste for designer coffees, and drove a black SUV that always looked too clean for mud country. She was the sort of person who ran for the HOA board because she liked the sound of deciding things, whether it was where a mailbox should sit or whether a neighbor's birdbath matched the fence. She didn't know my name for the first few months she used my field as a cut-through. She only knew it was faster than the loop road, and besides, she'd say, smiling with the sort of kindness that reads like a ledger, "It's only a few ruts. Jesse, lighten up." I tried the polite route. I left a note on her windshield the first time the mower tracks were obvious. I waved when I caught her. I asked her not to drive through. I even went to a meeting, sat in a folding chair under fluorescent lights with a dozen people who cared about pavers and paint colors more than dirt, and explained the losses. I talked about seedlings, about what a good planting season looks like, about the rent and the bills, and the room hummed like a courtroom when I said the thing that should have been simple: "Please don't drive through my field." Lila smiled like she'd heard a joke and told the board, with the kind of clipped laugh that closes conversations, that we were being dramatic. "It's a shortcut, Jesse, not a crime," she said, and someone at the table nodded as if confirming an astronomical fact, and the room folded in on itself. I left with a paper cup and a small, hot thing in the back of my throat that felt a little like failure. I pick my battles. I'm not one for public scenes, but the field belonged to me, and every week the same story played out: new tire marks, crushed roots, and a little more of next year's food gone. The anger didn't come all at once. It crept in between chores, in the way I found myself checking the fence line more than usual, in how I stopped humming old songs I liked because my attention was just taken up with watching. I planted plans, not plots. I started with a sign that said private property, then another, no trespassing. People either didn't see them or chose not to. One Saturday, Lila pulled up, leaned out the window, and said, "You and these signs, Jesse, we're neighbors, come on." Her voice was syrupy, and the look on her face said she was doing me a favor by being reasonable. There's a moment in people's stories where you can see the fork in the road, when you can tell whether they're going to swallow the scene and move on, or whether something inside them will shift and say, "This is mine to protect." For me, it was the day I walked the rows and counted nothing that used to be full. I could see the math: seedlings dead, time lost, the price of a season adding up like pennies in a jar, and I heard my father's voice, who'd once told me, gently but without fluff, that land asks for respect and gives respect back only if you stand for it. I didn't want to embarrass anyone. I didn't want to make enemies. I wanted a boundary that would hold. I'll tell you, I thought long about options. I called the county. There are rules about easements and rights of way, and the nice man at the office was sympathetic but slow, the kind of system that helps if you can wait months to be right. I asked neighbors. Some shrugged. Some whispered that Lila had money and influence, and that if she decided to push back, she'd win bylaws and charm in equal measure. So I decided on something simpler and quieter. A measure meant more to protect than to punish, but I can see how the line between the two gets thin. I changed how I blocked the shortcut. I didn't arm myself or do anything cruel. I put up a barrier that was functional during wet months, a structure that made the route less attractive and would, by design, slow down anyone who tried to zip across during planting. I'm not going to give you construction details if you're thinking about that. That's not why we're here. What matters is intent. It was there to protect the seedlings, to reclaim the boundary, not to cause harm. I told one friend what I'd done. He raised an eyebrow and said the phrase people say when they don't want to get involved, "You might be opening a can of worms." He was right, and I understood that. Lila found it on a bright Tuesday when the field smelled like turned earth and the sky had that thin high winter haze. She came roaring in, phone on speaker, voice loud enough for me to hear her through the window of my house. "Who put that thing in my shortcut?" she demanded, using the word like it was a person rather than my property. Her friend, a man I'd only seen in passing, laughed, and someone started filming, which is how public things go now. There's always a recording to lock the moment in amber. She got out of the SUV with flourish, like a woman who'd surprised an inconvenience rather than encountered one. "You can't just block public access," she said, tone climbing toward the local news. I tried to be calm. I walked down the path and told her, straight and plain, that the land was mine and that I'd asked. She rolled her eyes and said the line that sticks in my ribs months later. "You can put up all the signs you want, but you can't stop progress, Jesse. People are going to do what's easy." That's when she nudged something, a bump of her foot against the ground where the barrier met the old rutted path, and the mud gave in a little. I won't lie about the taste of what came next. I felt a flicker of satisfaction when her foot slid, when she swore and braced, when she realized the shortcut had turned into something that refused to cooperate with her schedule. She became louder, angrier. "You did this on purpose," she accused, and I remember the way her mascara smudged, as if the world were punishing her for being angry. Her friend reached for his phone and jabbed record. Someone shouted from a porch. Neighbors gathered like a line of dominoes, some curious, some smug. She stomped. She spat accusations. She threatened to sue. And the HOA board convened with less ceremony than I expected. Emails, a phone call or two, mostly calls from people picking their side based on where they'd had dinner last week. Lila put on a performance that would have been a good bit in another life, hands waving, voice polished, the practiced outrage of someone accustomed to a sympathetic audience. She framed it as confrontation, a man disrupting the community for personal reasons. It was theater, and for a second I felt like a character in someone else's script. But then something odd happened. People began to remember details they hadn't at the meeting under fluorescent lights. Mrs. Hargrove across the street, who'd been quiet in the HOA sessions, told the board that her son had a job working on my farm in the summers and that he'd seen trucks trample the nightlight plants. Another neighbor, a pastor I'd shaken hands with at potlucks, said he'd seen the SUV go through twice last week during harvest season. Small, human, inconvenient facts started to add up, and Lila's polished outrage began to look less like moral superiority and more like entitlement meeting consequence. When the tow truck came, because yes, eventually someone's pride calls for assistance, it was not dramatic in the way movies stage it. The truck driver muttered about city folk and messing with private property, and Lila, red-faced and sputtering, tried to bargain, tried to claim she'd been the aggrieved party. People took videos, sure, but now some of the videos showed the same sequence I'd been living with for months, a shortcut used as if it owed the world nothing. The chorus shifted. I don't pretend it was clean. I don't pretend I was without guilt. There was a quiet hour the next morning when I walked the rows and saw the tracks sink into the soil, and I looked at my hands and thought of the ways pride can make small things bigger than they need to be. I thought about the signs I'd put up, the words I'd used, the tone of voice that hardened like frost. I thought about Lila's voice when she'd said she was going to sue because lawsuits are real and they can make a mess of lives and families and plans. There's a cost to standing up, and sometimes the cost is more than you imagined. Still, when the corn came up the next season and the rows were straight and the fence held, neighbors nodded when I drove by. Some offered help with irrigation, some offered a handshake. Lila moved her mailbox a little further down the lane and started using the loop road, and occasionally I'd see her at the market pretending not to look at me, which is a small, perfect kind of victory that tastes like a good rye and a piece of pie. I'll tell you this in the bedrock way I know how. Boundaries are not punishment, they're a way of saying this is mine. This matters. And if you choose to respect it, that's great. And if you don't, then expect consequences you can live with. That line between consequence and cruelty is fuzzy. You have to walk it with care. I walked it. I bent. I cursed a little. I called the county. I spoke my piece at a meeting. And in the end, I did what I thought would protect what mattered to me. Whether I was right in every moment is something I still think about in the dark. When the farm is quiet and the radio hums low, And sometimes I wake up and ask myself if I could have done it with less spectacle. So what do you think? Did I stand up for my livelihood? Or did I let it become a petty war? Was Lila entitled and wrong? Or was I too stubborn to compromise? There's no neat answer that fixes everyone's feelings. And that's why I tell you this, because I want to hear how you'd handle a boundary being crossed. What justice looks like in a town where everyone knows everyone's business. Drop a comment. Tell me if you think I did the right thing. Share a story where you had to draw a line. And if you're on the fence about it, tell me why. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for a conversation, and maybe, just maybe, some of you will say I was right, and some will say I should have swallowed it, and both of you will tell me something true I haven't considered.